If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button to keep up to date with all my latest videos.
Well, morning guys, we're out fishing down here just off Red Bank Road out on the Gynn today, and hopefully we're going to see some fish. If you have a look just down here behind me, we've got an absolutely monumental little gully just there. That looks like it's about 5 foot deep. We've got a couple of holes lining up the beach, nice big sandbank, loads of little ripples out there. So with any luck, this is going to be producing some fish for us today.
Looking at the conditions which we had out there in front of us today, there wasn't too much of an edge on it, so I decided to keep the hook sizes down. I was fishing with 2 O's on both sides, the bait holders as usual. Now I used the flapper rigs as I use quite a lot, and I used the 2 hook pattern on each one, with the bottom and the middle swivel having the hooks on them. And the worm which I'm using today was dug the night before and was very fresh, and trust me, it did attract some attention. Now it didn't take long to start getting bites, and in fact I missed the first few, and the reason for this was probably that there were very small fish coming in with the very first pushes of the tide. But after a few missed bites, I started finding my way and hooking into a few of the fish out there. Thought I'd add this bit of footage in. Just at the foot of the wall where I was just dropped that weight down, you can see a little bit of weed on my line start to wave around as this first fish took. And the first fish to open up the account today was a little 5-bearded rocklin. Now it was the only one I'd had in this session, but for some reason they seem to be quite abundant this year, because almost every session I'm out I seem to pick one up. And there he is, unhooked and ready to make his way back to the sea. Throughout this entire session, the bites were absolutely relentless. They came in thick and fast, and they came pretty much from about half an hour after we'd set up, right up until the point we packed up and went home. Now in total, we caught quite a few fish, and this would made for quite a good and enjoyable session. And gliding across the surface, making his way in, is the first dab of the day. Now dabs are lovely little eating fish, and I love eating these guys, but I've only ever caught one which I deemed big enough to take home, and that one was 32 centimeters, and I've probably not had one over 25 since. Once I'd struck into my third fish of the day, this instantly went very heavy. Now as I was pulling it in, I could feel a lot of weight, and I could feel some small kicks on the line, and I was hoping that I picked up something just a little bit bigger. But to my realisation, when I pulled this in and started bringing it in close, I realised that I dragged Stuart's gear in with me. Now the reason for this, the tide was pulling through quite savagely, especially because we were both fishing in that gully, and also we were packed in very tight, which meant that we couldn't cast with a wide span because of anglers to both the left and the right of me and Stuart. People who watch my channel a lot may realise that I'm throwing the dabs off the top of the wall at the start of this session, the same with the rocklin. The only reason for this is that the area of the wall we were fishing today had a bit of a slope on it, and I couldn't reach it by dangling them down and dropping them out with my weight off the end of my rod tip. So the dabs being a lot tougher than whiting, they got airmailed back off the top, and once the whiting had started, like this fish is here, these guys got clipped to the weights and dropped in in the normal way, but whiting are a very delicate fish, and if they hit the water with any force, then I find they generally don't tend to make it. And there you go, I'm into another fish, bringing that one in. Now this fish, just like the rest, were taken on that fresh worm. In fact, that was the only bait I used all day. Normally I will have something else with me, but today I was quite confident in the bait that I had. Now this was another dab, and this dab had a very lovely clean pattern and quite a sandy brown colour to it. But this dab was fair and square hooked in the mouth, even though it was on a 2-0 hook, which for me, I often find that I foul hook dabs usually in the face when they're trying to take the bait from the middle of the hook. Although I had quite a high success rate with hooking into fish, there were still a few that I missed. Now you can see with this bite, it was a nice clear bite, and I picked the rod up, give it a couple of turns, tightened up onto the weight, couldn't feel anything else, so I put it down, left it there, and this did actually pay off because I did pick up a fish on this a little bit later on. But then again, you never know which hook they've taken, since I have 2 hook flapper rig on that hook, on that rod. And once I picked my other rod up, I could feel a little bit more weight, and it turned out that this was actually my first double hookup of the day. Now, one of the things I like to know about double hookups is, did I hook a fish and not see a bite as I was messing about with my other rod, or did both fish take it at the same time? That's something which I don't know. But this did turn out to be 2 fish caught in one go, and you can't argue with that. These 2 fish both went back safely in the standard way for me, which is hooking them up to the weight and gently lowering them into the water. Now when you do this, once you hit the water, you need to let the weight drop quite quickly, and that gives the resistance for the fish to basically stay on the surface while the weight goes down to the bottom and the anchors to fall out through their gills. In this next clip, you get the dilemma, which rod do you pick up, because both rods bite at pretty much exactly the same time. Now I chose to pick up the blue rod, and I pulled this one in, but whilst pulling this one in, I could see the fish was still attached to the other rod on the other side. And after a few more twitches on the other rod, which I'd left on the stand, it suddenly went slack, and it started going slacker and slacker, and that's when I realised Stuart was reeling my fish in for me. Like I said, the tide was fairly severe, and staying anchored up, especially fishing so close to each other, was quite difficult. So we did pull each other in a couple of times throughout this session. Once Stuart has brought my weight and line up onto the side with his, then obviously you've got to untangle it. And this can be one of the beauties of using rigs like mine, where everything unclips. So all you need to do really is find out what bits are attached to what, unclip them, and then you can usually take both rigs apart without ever having to sort of cut any line or sort of move anything around, or even untangle any little knots. And for me, I find this incredibly useful if I ever get the 2 rigs wrapped together. And with all that over, I had 3 fish to unhook and another 3 to add to my tally for the day. Whilst the little whiting went back, the bigger whiting stayed with me for my dinner. As high water approaches, the bites became more and more delicate. Now I generally put this down to the fact of the lack of water movement. As the tide turns to go back out, obviously it has to stop at some point. So what I'll often do if I'm getting very delicate bites and I start missing them is I'll get a first bite, I'll pick the rod up and I'll wait for that pull, and that pull's the indication to strike, and I can do that a lot quicker if the rod's in my hand as opposed to being sat on the rest. And in this case, it worked this time. Now I was fishing a very short distance on this rod, and that's possibly why the other rod was picking up more fish. But when this whiting came up, not only was this another one to add to the list, this was also another whiting which seemed to have problems with its eyes, as one eye is nice and black and clear, whereas the other eye was completely cloudy, just like the first whiting that I had earlier on in the session. Now one of the things to remember when you're unhooking a whiting, especially if the hook's down there any distance, is the fact that they've got quite sharp teeth. So even once the hook's relieved, what the fish can do is bite down and hold on to that bait again, and that's what this fish actually did. And no sooner had I put my other rod back down after recasting it, then the long rod at distance went again, and again I was into another fish. One of the things you may notice that I'm doing when I'm striking into the fish, especially with the rod with the blue line on, the rod which was fishing over onto the right hand side, is the fact that I'm actually walking back over to the left to reel this fish in. That's because the gentleman who was fishing to my right was obviously fairly close and I didn't want to tangle his gear up. So the more pressure I could bring over to the left would keep the fish coming in fairly straight in comparison to where my rod stand was. Something I mentioned earlier in the video was the fact that a lot of the time you'll foul hook dabs with the hook sizes that I'm using. 2.0s are fairly big for a dab to get, and this fish was more to what I'd expect when I catch these fish on bigger hooks. It was actually hooked on the outside of the mouth. And as we were moving deeper into the ebb, the water was getting shallower and shallower, the bites were coming fewer and further between. But this fish which is coming in now is a first for me on Life of Gaz, and that's not to do with what the fish was, but it was to do with how it was caught. Because this fish, even though it was only a dab and it was small and it was caught on a size 2 hook, actually had managed to take one hook down and take the second bait as well and be hooked fair and square with both hooks, as you can see just here. Although the first hook was only in the lips of the fish and popped out fairly easily, the second hook was right the way down this fish's throat, which meant that I had to be able to retrieve this hook. I needed to do something with it. Now I have made a video on how I do this and I explain how I do it fully, and I'll leave a little card at the end of the video. If you guys want to click on that to see how I do this properly, then check that one out. But for now, I'll just tell you what I do is I unhook the clip, take it down through the gills, make sure you get it the right way on the hook, and then turn the hook around, and you should be able to bring that hook out without doing any damage to the fish and without leaving a hook left in that fish as it swims off back to enjoy the rest of its life.
Well guys, that brings us to the end of another session here on Life with Gaz. If you've liked this video, make sure you hit the subscribe button down here. Check out my last video there, my playlist up here, and if you want to see that deep hooking fish video, check that one up top.